The human man stepped off the gleaming hover platform and onto the palace floor, a surface so polished it reflected the twin suns outside in rippling, liquid gold patterns. He had imagined entering a scene of formal greetings, of crystal-clear protocols, ceremonial gestures, maybe even an alien fanfare that would make his ears ring, or at least vibrate politely. Instead, there was silence. Absolute, perfect, unnerving silence. Holographic attendants floated in place along the hallway, their translucent forms flickering faintly as though the palace itself had forgotten how to breathe. He swallowed, trying to make a joke to himself, because jokes, he had learned, were the human way to survive awkward silences. "Okay," he muttered. "Either I've stumbled into some interstellar prank show, or this is a palace that really needs a Spotify subscription." He walked slowly, boots making no sound on the frictionless floor, eyes darting at the architecture that defied gravity in every imaginable direction. Staircases spiraled in impossible loops, walls rippled like molten glass, and corridors split and merged like rivers of light. Every so often, a tiny drone zipped past, carrying a silver tray of refreshments that hovered as though uncertain whether anyone would ever take them. He reached out and nudged one, and it rolled away with perfect self-preservation logic, as if to say, "Touch me again, human, and you'll be sorry." That's when he noticed her, a flicker of motion at the far end of the hall, soft yet unmistakably deliberate. The girl's presence felt alive, unprogrammed, utterly unpredictable. She was small, barely reaching his chest, with long ears curling backward in elegant arcs that caught the light in faint bioluminescent streaks. Her hair shimmered silver and blue, her skin pale with a subtle luminescence, as if she had been sculpted from starlight and laughter. She looked human enough to disarm him, but the alien differences made every movement of hers hypnotically graceful, a choreography that defied the rigid symmetry of the palace. He straightened, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket as if he were about to deliver a speech. "I can handle this," he whispered. "I can survive whatever He stopped. She was running toward him. Not cautiously, not politely, but full tilt, as if gravity were a minor inconvenience and etiquette merely a suggestion. "Whoa, hey, wait, slow down," he called, waving his arms like a clumsy conductor. She laughed, a tinkling sound that bounced off the walls, reverberating like wind chimes caught in a solar breeze. The palace, silent and stoic until now, seemed to lean in, as if to watch this unprecedented breach of decorum. Drones froze mid-flight, and holographic attendants blinked in something approaching shock. The human man realized, with a mixture of panic and amusement, that he was about to be hugged by a tiny alien whirlwind who had apparently never learned anything about proper ceremonial procedure. She reached him, and before he could summon a witty retort, she wrapped her small arms around his waist, squeezing as though she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. The man stumbled, arms flailing awkwardly as he tried to maintain balance, muttering under his breath, "Not exactly the handshake I was expecting." The girl giggled, a sound that dissolved his nervous tension like sunlight melting frost. He realized that her innocence, her fearless spontaneity, was a force the palace could not contain, a defiance of centuries of rigid expectation and unspoken rules. He tried to respond with humor because humans defaulted to humor in impossible situations. "You know," he said, adjusting her slightly as she held on, "in my culture, we usually start with introductions. A hug is a bit aggressive." She tilted her head, long ears twitching, and offered him a mischievous grin that suggested, very clearly, that she was in charge of protocol now. As he regained some composure, he noticed details he had missed at first. Tiny, shifting patterns glimmered along her arms, faint streaks that pulsed with light as she moved. Her eyes, large and liquid, reflected constellations that didn't exist anywhere in his charts. Even the air around her seemed charged, as though the molecules themselves were aware of her presence and reluctant to disturb the magic she carried. He glanced down at the hovering refreshments and muttered to himself, "Guess no one's taking a sip of whatever that is," and smiled despite the growing chaos. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed behind him, soft and measured. He turned to see figures in flowing robes, palace officials, he assumed, pausing mid-stride, eyes wide as if they had stumbled into a scene no one had rehearsed for centuries. One of them whispered, voice quivering, Is that allowed?" The man tilted his head, hugging the alien girl more firmly and shrugging. "I don't know," he said. "I'm new here. I think we're making history." She laughed again, and the sound rippled through the corridors like a joyous contagion, touching every stone, every beam of suspended light, every hovering drone that had been waiting for instruction it clearly would never receive. The palace, magnificent and intimidating, began to feel less like an unscalable fortress and more like a playground. If playgrounds included floating staircases, rooms that rotated on invisible axes, and ceilings that simulated miniature galaxies. The human man realized that the silence he had feared was not emptiness, but anticipation. The palace was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when protocol met pure, unfiltered curiosity. And for the first time since he had set foot on this alien world, he laughed. Not nervously, not cautiously, but fully, heartily, embracing the absurdity of being the first human to be hugged by a princess who clearly made her own rules. The girl pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at him, her long ears curling in a way that made him think of artful brushstrokes. "Do you like it here?" she asked, voice tinged with giggles and starfear. He blinked, trying to process the question and the gravity of the moment all at once. I think I'm going to need a map or maybe a manual or a miracle," he said. She laughed again, twirling in place, sending a ripple of starlight across the floor. And somewhere deep in the palace, the silent corridors shifted imperceptibly, as if they had begun to recognize that this was the start of something entirely new, a bond that no hierarchy, no tradition, and no protocol could contain. The human man straightened, bracing for what he assumed would be formal reprimands, but the girl simply tugged at his hand, dragging him forward into the unknown. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you everything, maybe even the cafeteria." He stumbled, laughed, and followed, realizing that the palace, for all its majesty, had suddenly become the most unpredictable and entertaining place in the galaxy. The human man barely had time to catch his breath before the little alien girl tugged him through a twisting corridor that seemed to fold in on itself, corridors curving and intersecting in impossible angles as if the palace itself were a living, thinking entity. "Wait, slow down," he panted, arms flailing as he tried to keep pace with her energetic stride. She glanced back, her long ears flicking like radar dishes, and grinned. "You're too slow. Come on, or we'll miss the floating breakfast carts." The man stopped, staring at a tray of levitating pastries hovering perfectly in the middle of a rotating sphere of light. He reached for one hesitantly, and it darted away like a sentient jellyfish. "Oh, great, even the food is alive. Why am I not surprised?" She laughed, that tinkling, cosmic laugh that seemed to make the very walls hum, and skipped ahead. "You humans really don't know how to run for fun, do you?" she asked, and then she performed a sudden pirouette midair, her long ears twirling like luminous ribbons. He tried to follow her spin and ended up stumbling into a holographic pillar that blinked apologetically, displaying a floating message. "Warning, human clumsiness detected. Adjust trajectory." He muttered something about interstellar sarcasm being alive and well. The palace officials, still observing from the distance, whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile centuries of decorum with a situation that no manual had ever prepared them for. One whispered, voice barely audible, she's never done this before. Not even the queen dared." The man, overhearing this as he tried to steady himself, tilted his head and called out, "Is it me, or are you all imagining the same thing? Because I swear this place just learned how to gasp." He nearly fell backward when the girl shot past him again, zipping through a corridor that bent space in a way that seemed both deliberate and mischievous. "You look funny when you try to run," she said over her shoulder, laughing. "I mean it, humans wobble so much, it's cute." He grimaced. "Cute? I'm representing the entire species here. Do you know what this could mean for interstellar diplomacy?" She rolled her eyes, long ears twitching in exaggerated disbelief. "Relax. If your species can survive spaghetti without choking, you can survive a palace hallway." As they ran, he noticed subtle details of the architecture he hadn't observed before. Walls that shifted like liquid crystal to create endless vistas of alien worlds. Floors that resonated with each step, humming softly in alien scales. A hovering chandelier shaped like a galaxy spun slowly overhead, and for a fleeting moment he imagined it winking at him. The girl stopped abruptly and pointed. "Look." A corridor opened into a vast chamber where a crystalline fountain poured liquid light into a basin that defied gravity. The man blinked. Are we supposed to drink from it, or meditate?" She snorted. "Humans and their manuals, just look." He watched as the liquid formed shapes, depicting stories from the galaxy's past. One moment it was a star exploding, the next, a comet racing through unknown systems, and then a tiny figure. She danced across the projection, twirling and giggling. He laughed despite himself. "Okay, that's impressive, also terrifying, also adorable," he admitted. She spun in a final flourish and stopped right in front of him, long ears glowing faintly in soft waves. "See, told you it's fun. You just have to stop worrying all the time." He realized she was right. Despite the palace's immense scale, the protocols, the expected stiffness, this small being had transformed it into a playground. A sudden soft chime echoed through the chamber. The man froze. What was that? Warning, alarm. The girl rolled her eyes. "Relax, that's just the palace announcing that someone is watching." He looked around, spotting a row of robed figures observing from the balcony, their expressions carefully neutral but betraying faint twitches of shock. "Ah," he said, bowing awkwardly, "the audience finally shows up. Should I wave?" She giggled and pulled him closer. "Don't be silly. You just do what feels right. Usually that's running into trouble anyway." Trouble indeed found them quickly. One of the officials accidentally triggered a floating holographic display, projecting a timeline of the Queen's reign. The man stumbled again, pointing at the display. Is it supposed to be this big? It's huge." The girl squinted, long ears twitching in thought. "Oh, that's nothing. Wait until you see the dining hall. There are entire galaxies in there. Literally." He groaned. "Great. I just hope the pastries survive." They turned a corner into a room filled with softly glowing plants, some pulsing like hearts, others emitting faint melodic tones. The man paused, inhaling. This is botanical music, right?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Yep, the palace has everything. Music, food, gravity tricks. We even have a mini black hole in the West Wing, but don't touch it, serious hazard." He raised an eyebrow. "A mini black hole? I think I need a vacation after this, but sure, why not?" The girl clapped her hands, making a ripple of light jump from one plant to another, creating a dazzling display. He laughed, watching, and realized that despite the grandeur of the palace, it was the little moments, the small acts of whimsy, the uncontained joy of this child, that made the place feel alive. His fear, his nervousness, his expectations of stiffness, all evaporated. Humor, as it often did for humans, became his lifeline. "All right," he said, catching his breath. "I admit it. You've won. I surrender to your rules. But can we take a break before I accidentally break a quantum chandelier?" She giggled and tugged him toward another corridor, one that twisted impossibly like a Möbius strip. "No breaks. Adventures wait for no human." As they disappeared around the bend, he looked back briefly, noting the officials still frozen in mid-observation, some whispering frantically to each other, and others discreetly taking notes. "I think I might be the first human to survive this palace with my dignity intact," he muttered. The girl turned her head, long ears twitching, and shouted, "Dignity is boring. Fun is mandatory." He groaned and laughed at the same time, realizing that in this palace, rules were suggestions and joy was an unstoppable force. By the time they reached the central atrium, the human man understood that the palace's silence had been less about fear or decorum and more about anticipation, waiting for a spark, a breach, a small hand to reach out and change everything. And in that moment, pulled along by the tiny alien whirlwind with glowing ears and endless energy, he felt the pulse of a galaxy waiting to be shared, with laughter echoing louder than protocol, and wonder stretching beyond the edges of reality itself. The human man followed the little alien girl into the grandest chamber of the palace, a vast circular room that shimmered like liquid sapphire and floated several meters above the atrium. Suspended walkways circled the room in intricate patterns, connecting terraces of glowing flora and softly singing fountains that defied gravity. The girl ran ahead, her long ears tracing arcs in the air, leaving faint trails of luminous particles that danced and dissipated like tiny shooting stars. Almost there, she called over her shoulder, voice sparkling with mischief, "You're going to meet my mom, but don't worry, she's mostly scary-looking, not actually scary." The human took a deep breath, adjusting his jacket and straightening his tie, which now seemed absurdly mundane in comparison to the alien majesty surrounding him. He muttered under his breath, "Mostly scary-looking. That's comforting, in an interstellar sense." He followed, careful not to trip over the subtle undulations of the floor that seemed to shift beneath him like gentle waves, a quirk of palace engineering he had only begun to understand. As they entered the central platform, the queen appeared. She was regal beyond imagination, taller than any human, with long, curling ears tipped in gold that reflected the ambient light of the room. Her eyes were pools of liquid silver, ancient yet bright with intelligence, and her presence commanded the air itself to still. For a moment, the human froze, trying to remember every protocol manual he had skimmed for this exact occasion, but the girl grabbed his hand and whispered conspiratorially, "Just smile. Maybe even wave, it helps." The queen's gaze swept over him, and for a heartbeat he expected a reprimand, a protocol lecture, perhaps even intergalactic exile. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, the faintest curve of her lips betraying something like amusement. The little girl bounced excitedly in front of him. "Mom, this is the human I told you about. The one who runs funny and likes floating pastries." The human's jaw dropped, and he swallowed, trying not to stammer as the queen's eyes flicked briefly to the hovering breakfast carts and back to him. "You've survived our palace and our daughter's enthusiasm," she said, voice calm but layered with authority and warmth. "That is no small feat." He managed a nervous laugh, bowing awkwardly. I did my best. Honestly, it was mostly the kid's energy keeping me upright." The queen's eyes twinkled, and for the first time he noticed that even her long ears seemed to quiver with subtle amusement. The girl giggled and clung to his arm. "See, I told you, fun beats protocol any day." The queen motioned gracefully, and the surrounding chambers adjusted in response, walls shifting to reveal panoramic views of the galaxy. Stars, planets, and swirling nebulae stretched beyond comprehension, and the human felt his chest tighten in awe. "We like to remind visitors that the universe is bigger than any rule book," the queen said softly, almost conversationally. "And sometimes the best connections are the simplest ones." He realized she was speaking not only to him, but to the palace itself, to every rigid protocol, every floating attendant and hesitant drone. The entire structure seemed to breathe in agreement, shimmering gently in response to her words. The human glanced at the girl, whose eyes were glowing faintly in delight. I think I get it now," he said. "It's not about the rules. It's about connection, laughter, curiosity, trust. Even in a place this big, with centuries of tradition, a small act can change everything." She nodded vigorously, long ears flicking, and whispered, "Exactly." And you didn't even need to hack the quantum doors or negotiate the mini black hole in the West Wing. You just listened. The Queen gestured to a hovering orb of light, which expanded into a detailed holographic map of the galaxy, highlighting trade routes, cultural hubs, and secret locations that were normally inaccessible to outsiders. We extend this knowledge to those who prove their openness. You have done that, she said. And more importantly, you have shown that joy and empathy transcend species, protocol, and expectation. The human swallowed, realizing that the privilege of seeing the galaxy in this way was a gift unlike any he could have imagined, and that his life had already changed profoundly in the span of a few hours. He turned to the girl who beamed at him with uncontainable pride. "We make a good team," he said, flexing dramatically. She laughed and rolled her eyes, long ears twirling. "You mean I make a good team and you survive, mostly." He grinned, feeling warmth spread through him, a sense of belonging he had never expected to find in an alien palace thousands of light years from home. The Queen's voice cut through the soft hum of the palace. "You may remain as our honored guest, human, not because of your rank or skill, but because of your openness to wonder. Let this palace and our family serve as a reminder. The universe rewards curiosity, courage, and heart. Even the smallest gestures, like a hug, can ripple across stars." The human nodded, eyes sweeping the room, taking in the floating walkways, the singing plants, the twirling lights, the tiny prankish drones, and the girl bouncing at his side. I understand. Thank you, truly," he said. "I've learned more about connection in one day than I ever imagined possible." The Queen inclined her head, and the girl squealed, tugging him toward a balcony that overlooked a garden suspended in zero gravity. "Come on, there's more to see. You haven't even met the jellyfish trees yet." He laughed again, feeling lighter than he had in months, and stepped forward, embracing the chaos, the wonder, and the humor of the palace. He realized he had changed. He was no longer just a visitor trying to survive alien protocol. He was a participant, a bridge between worlds, a bearer of human curiosity and laughter in a galaxy that had never quite expected it. As they moved through the palace, the officials and attendants watched silently, the Queen's subtle smile evident in their ranks. The palace had once held its breath, expecting formality and ritual. Now it pulsed with life, joy, and possibility. A single human had arrived, and in doing so had reminded an entire civilization that connection, humor, and innocence could rewrite centuries of tradition. The girl leapt onto a floating platform, tugging him along, and he stumbled, laughing uncontrollably. All right, I get it. Fun beats dignity any day." She giggled, long ears flicking proudly. He realized that this moment, these hours in a palace that bent space and expectations, had changed him forever. He had entered as a visitor, hesitant and unsure, and now left as someone who understood the quiet power of trust, the audacity of joy, and the simple truth that even the smallest act, a hug, a smile, a shared laugh, could echo across the stars. The human man took a deep breath,